everyone, welcome to my September book reviews. I broke my streak. I had 3 months in a row of double-digit reads, and I broke that streak this month, but that's okay. I still finished 8 things. 3 of them were audiobooks, though, and I want to talk about that just briefly here at the beginning of this video. If you don't want to hear my thoughts on audiobook versus physical books or why I consume more audiobooks this month, feel free to skip to the next chapter where I actually start the book reviews. But I do want to talk about audiobook listening just briefly here. Briefly because there's an outstanding video that I watched recently that I agreed with like 99% of what he said in the video. And this was a video about this topic by A.P. Canavan over at A Critical Dragon, where he talked about audiobook listening and physical book reading. And I think the title of the video was something like, yes, audiobook listening is different, or no, it was, are listening to audiobooks actually reading, and does it matter? Something along those lines. Anyway, I'll link it so that whatever I'm messing up with the title, you're able to find it a little bit easier. But anyway, I really like that discussion that AP had about audiobook listening versus physical book reading, because yes, they are different, but also yes, you can consider it a form of reading. Maybe semantics, it's more listening than reading, but you are still consuming the material, often able to understand the material and speak intelligently about it. So it's just a different way of approaching the text. I just wanted to point out that I am not replacing physical reading for audiobook listening. My entire life, like my favorite leisure activity is physical reading, and that's for me always the printed page. In fact, I don't like ebooks that much. I pretty much only do ebooks when I'm traveling. So most of the time it's a printed page. None of my audiobook listening in the last month has been a result of me substituting reading for audiobook listening. And the big reason for me that I'm listening a little bit more is I made a slight lifestyle change. When I start the school year, I do like a New Year's resolution for school. I don't do New Year's resolutions in January. I do one when my school year starts. And I usually do a professional one and a personal one. And for my personal one this year, I changed just a little bit of my daily routine. And what I changed is I'm a runner. I used to be a competitive runner, and I don't do races or anything like that anymore, but I do run 3 mornings a week. What I used to do is on the off mornings is I would let myself sleep later. Well, I said, no, I'm not going to do that anymore. I'm going to get up the same time, and I'm going to go for a walk around the neighborhood. So because of that, I started having more time to listen to audiobooks. While I don't listen to audio when I go for a run, when I go for a walk around the neighborhood, I do pop in an audiobook. So I was adding right there like 3 days a week, about an hour walk every morning, an extra 3 hours. So because of that, I was able to listen more of audiobooks. And well, then I got a little injury going on. I'm doing some physical therapy right now, so I'm not running at the moment, but I'm walking 6 days a week. So it's a lot more that I'm able to consume than before, where my audiobook listening used to just be my commute and then if I was doing chores around the house. So in many ways, my audiobook consumption has tripled, and that's why I got 3 books to listen to this month. One of the things that AP talked about in that video that I really enjoyed is he kind of addressed both people on both spectrums of the audiobook argument. He addressed the people that are staunch audiobooks are not reading, addressed them and kind of shot their theory down. And then on the other side as well, the people that do think that audiobook listening is a one-to-one, yes, I read the book, saying that it is a little bit different. And that's one of the reasons I wanted to address this, because one of the things that I took away from this video is that the performance is very important. When you're reading an audiobook, there's a difference between reading a physical book. Reading a physical book, the author's words go straight to your brain, you interpret them. With an audiobook, someone's in the middle, and they are interpreting the words and giving a performance of the author's words. So unless the audiobook narrator is the author, it is a performance of a type. And that's one reason I wanted to address it, because I want to make sure going forward, anytime I talk about a book that I listen to, that I do give credit to the audiobook narrator, because it is their interpretation and their performance in many times of the work that may influence my enjoyment of the work. So that's the reason I wanted to go forward with that. But anyway, let's go ahead and get into the books finally. That was a long intro. As always, chapters below. I'll group them by genre with my book of the month at the very end. All right, we're going to start with The Guns of August by Barbara Tuchman. This is the third book I've read by Tuchman. This won the Pulitzer Prize for nonfiction, and it's evident. It's so obvious why this was a Pulitzer Prize winner. The level of detail is quite remarkable in this thing that recounts the first month of World War I. And not only just the level of detail with like troop movements, but in giving you a lot of perspectives of the people. Tuchman has a really good skill at bringing those people to life where they feel more like fleshed out characters in a fiction book than just characters in history that might be a little more wooden or a little more two-dimensional in another work of nonfiction. I mentioned that this is the third work of Tuchman that I've read, including The Proud Tower last month. And as much as I love this, I mean, this is a 5-star read. It'll be a finalist for my nonfiction book of the year. There's no question that it deserves to be the Pulitzer Prize winner of nonfiction. I think the other two books by Tuchman I read are actually better. The Proud Tower, which I read last month, and I read The March of Folly, about 10 years ago. The March of Folly is great. It talks about just some big decisions by organizations in history that just kind of, it was just a really bad choice, and she illuminated those, like Americans' involvement in Vietnam, Trojan War, the Schism. Anyway, that's a really, really good book. The reason I think those two books are a little better than The Guns of August is one of the things that I really love about Tuchman is I think she has a true gift for taking a lot of information, synthesizing that information, and communicating it to her readers in a way that doesn't dumb any of it down, but makes it really clear and much more easily digestible than a lot of other authors are able to do. I think that's her skill. And I think in this book, she had less opportunity to do that because she had to do a lot of, okay, and these troops are going this way, and it was going to take this long. She had to do a lot of that, putting all the puzzle pieces in the places. So because of that, I think this is maybe a little bit less than those other two works, but it's still fantastic. If you haven't read much about World War I feel personally that World War I oftentimes is so overshadowed by World War II, but there's so much of interest in that World War that I think this is a great one if you want to read more about World War I. In conjunction with The Proud Tower, which is the other work of World War I that she wrote here, which is she wrote it later, but it's kind of a prequel. It's kind of the state of the world prior to World War I. But home run of a book, fantastic read was The Guns of August by Barbara Tuchman. Let's go next to Disquiet Gods by Christopher Ruocchio. This is my favorite work in the Sun Eater universe. I've read 12 things now. I've read the 6 novels, I've read 3 short fiction collections, and 3 novellas. And this is my favorite, which has me super excited for the conclusion of the series, which is coming out in November, the 7th and final novel of the Sun Eater. So, previous to this being my favorite was Howling Dark, which was the second book in the series. And this, in many ways, a lot of the things that happen in Howling Dark get some resolution, or at least the next step in this book. In many ways, it's kind of a direct sequel to that book. And so that side of it I loved. One of the things I love most about Ruocchio's books is I love when he digs into kind of the history and lore of this universe, this far future universe. When he gets into kind of philosophical discussions, often of a metaphysical nature, that's when I really dig what Ruocchio's doing. And there's a lot of that in here, just like there was in Howling Dark. And the last act of this is just incredible. There's another aspect of this that I really liked, is one of the things that's tough about a first-person narrative is I think it's easy to kind of get not bored, but kind of sick of hearing the first-person narrator. And a lot of times, the way to correct that, which I think Ruocchio does really well in here, is through the secondary characters. We have a secondary character who is from some previous books that shines a light on Hadrian just so well. And then there's a new secondary character that we meet at the beginning of the book, or you might have met in a short story from the third collection, that in many ways I think humanized and maybe provided a little bit of a foil for Hadrian. Hadrian can be very melodramatic, and I think sometimes the secondary characters can bring out more from him than maybe Hadrian will himself, even though he's still writing the narrative. But I really enjoyed Disquiet Gods. It has me super, super excited for Shadows Upon Time, which is coming out in November. I mentioned in the intro, I think I talked about rereading epic fantasy via audiobook is a kind of cool thing. And, well, I did that this month with The Prophet of Edan by Philip Chase. The audiobook narrator is Alan Walker, who we know as Library of Alexandria, and he did a tremendous job in bringing this book to life, just like he did in the first book. He has a gift for voices and characterization, and I just really enjoyed his performance. So if you've read Prophet of Edan, or even if you haven't, if you want to pick up the audiobooks, fantastic. I liked this book more upon reread, and it's not that I didn't like it. I think it was like a 4-star book for me the first time around, but a lot of times one of the great things, especially in epic fantasy and other works that are just a lot going on, a lot of characters, a lot in the world, is when you're not reading to find out what happens next, it's often easier to pick up on a lot of the other things. Additionally, knowing where the story is going, I was able to just look at some of the characters that seem very secondary in this book, but that I know will be more important in the trajectory of the series. And I could really appreciate what Chase did with those characters. Additionally, in the world building, I loved the conflicts in this story, even more than the first time around. But I still loved all the other things. I love there's dragons in this book. There's some great magic in this book, some great battles. A few too many for my personal taste, but none of them seem to be too long. There were just a lot of them in this book because it is a holy war. But overall, I really enjoyed this reread experience of The Prophet of Edan, and I look forward to whenever the third book is out on audio, I'll be doing a reread of that one as well. Let's talk next about The Master of Whitestorm by Janny Wurts. My friend Christopher Navo sent me this from my Amazon wishlist 6 months ago, maybe even a year. Anyway, thank you, sir, because this is great. So The Master of Whitestorm is a standalone fantasy novel, and I really enjoyed it because this is one of those books where it kind of sneaks up on you. Master of Whitestorm follows a character named Coriander, and in the scope of the book, much of the storytelling is almost in vignettes, where we see, very initially, we see him right away, he's on a slave galley, and then gets out of that, of course, or there wouldn't be a book, and then there's another scene, and then there's another scene. And I think at the hands of a lesser author, it would have felt disjunct, but I felt that all of the things that happened within different chapters flowed really well from chapter to chapter. And Coriander, as a mercenary, has a lot of depth, but the author kind of keeps him at arm's length from you. And I'm sure that was a specific decision. The downside of that was, for me, I didn't really connect with him on an emotional level, but I did really enjoy the character, and I enjoyed all the things that he went through. The world building is quite remarkable. I'm always amazed at authors like Wurts has done it here, Guy Gabriel Kay, and some other authors that can just tell a standalone and give you a great picture of this world. And I really like this world. It was a series of islands. You got a little bit of kind of sailing types of things, but the different islands, you got a lot of things that I enjoyed, like even just kind of the climate and the weather was different, and the flora and fauna was explained very, very well because she's a very gifted writer in terms of descriptive writing. I think the only thing I didn't like about it was just that the character was held at arm's length, and I felt that was a specific intention from the author. I think, however, had the secondary characters given us a little bit more of him and why they connected with him, I never quite felt that. So because of that, I never felt like an emotional connection to the book, but I thoroughly enjoyed the book. I read it very quickly because it just had a very compelling narrative, because it kept changing, where Coriander was often doing this thing, and then next chapter he was often doing this thing. And I really loved just kind of the character kind of searching and searching and searching, and eventually finding something, Or maybe he doesn't. Anyway, I enjoyed The Master of Whitestorm by Janny Wurts. I hope to get to Ride House Chasm soon. That's another one of hers that I do own that the author sent to me, and I just haven't gotten to it yet. But I enjoyed The Master of Whitestorm by Janny Wurts. I read The Price of Spring by Daniel Abraham last month. That is half of this omnibus collection and 1/4 of the Long Price Quartet, which is a book series I had been buddy reading with John from Talking Story and Alan from the Library of Alexandria. So John and I are reading this for the first time, and this is one of Alan's favorite series. And I love this series a lot, and I cherish the last 4 months of reading these books and discussing it with those two guys, because it was such a great fantastical journey through these books. Such a great character journey of two characters that we meet as boys, and in this installment they are old men. And the Long Price Quartet is one of the reasons, there's a few series out there that, of all the top 10 lists on my channel, the video I'll have to redo the soonest is my top 10 favorite book series, because Long Price Quartet's probably going to be in that top 10. And this was an incredible journey. That said, the 4th book wasn't my favorite. The two men that we follow from the beginning, Ota and Mati, one of them in this book is an old man who had a lot of misfortune, and he's very angry in this book, and I kind of wanted him to just get over himself. And we joked about that on the live stream where we talked about this over on John's channel, Talking Story. But for me, it made me not like this book as much as the previous 3 books. Now, that said, I had to get the negative out of the way. The thing that's so remarkable is the characterization. Daniel Abraham, for me, is, in this series, doing some Hobb-level characterization, where we see these characters as young boys at the very beginning, and between each book there's like a 12 to 15 year gap, and we see them at various stages of their lives, and they're old men in this book. But you see a lot of the things that go all the way back to the very prologue of the first book that shaped who they are as men. And I just felt that the characterization was just so well done and so nuanced. It wasn't ever flamboyant or hyperbolic or over the top or anything like that. It was just really, really nuanced, and it felt real. So as much as I was frustrated with one of these characters in this book, it felt real, it felt human, and it felt earned. The stakes in this book are super, super high, and this book goes some really dark places in some of the things. There are some great elements of horror writing in this book, and the ending just, oh my goodness, was so strong. I was emotional at the end. And what's interesting is that our 2 main characters in many ways weren't the main characters in this final book. They were very present, but a couple of the female characters in particular kind of stole the show for us in this book, and for me in particular. But I really enjoyed The Price of Spring. I loved the Long Price Quartet. If you haven't read these, I think we talked about these as a group on all 4 books. Pick them up. I mean, this is half the series. So like the very next book I'm going to talk about is about the length of 3 of these books. And I think it's something that's highly underrated, highly underread, and certainly worth your time. So I enjoyed The Price of Spring by Daniel Abraham. Up next is The Talisman by Stephen King and Peter Straub. When I put this on the TBR, I assumed this was horror, but it's really more of a fantasy tale than anything else, so that's why it's in this category. So this is a collaboration by these 2 gentlemen. I read this like 30 years ago, and I didn't remember anything. I read Black House more recently, kind of remember some of that, but I hadn't remembered any of this one. And this is the story of a young boy named Jack. His mother is dying of cancer, and he discovers that there's this world kind of in parallel to ours that he learns is called the Territories, and it becomes Midworld in later Dark Tower stories. But anyway, he calls it the Territories, and he learns that there's a talisman in the Territories, and if he takes this big journey to recover this talisman, he could potentially save his mother's life as she's on her deathbed for cancer. And that's the story. So right away, there's things I like. I like young protagonists because King always writes them so well. I do love a quest tale. I do love kind of the way that King often juxtaposes the real world with a fantasy world, like in here in the territories. All of the people in the real world have kind of twins they call twinners in the other story, in the other world, and you kind of see the parallels between those characters. So there's so much in here that I like. However, the execution was really lacking for me. I felt that this book was about twice as long as it needed to be. And I do realize that plotting and pacing is oftentimes one of the most subjective aspects of reading. But I buddy read this with Joanna, and we both had the same thoughts about the pacing of this, as it was just super slow. The quest, as it went along, oftentimes would change into a new locale and a new situation with new secondary characters. And every time we got to one of those, I was excited because this is going to be great, this is going to be interesting. And then it dragged on just too long. So it was a bit of a disappointment. The other thing I didn't like is I had seen an interview with King where he talked about the collaborative process with Peter Straub here. And he said that what they did is they alternated chapters, but they wanted to make it look like you wouldn't be able to guess which author wrote each chapter. So King changed his writing style, and I suspect Straub did as well. And I felt the writing really bland and just really generic. And for me, one of the things I like about King is his writing style. Yes, it has its quirks, it has its oddities, but I really like that. And they did creep in at the end, in some of the climactic scenes at the end. I was reading, I said, oh, that's absolutely Stephen King wrote this chapter. But early in the book, because it was kind of a sanitized or more generic kind of writing style, the writing just didn't really connect for me. So this was a bit of a disappointment, unfortunately. I'm still planning on rereading Black House I think I have it penciled in November, which is the second collaboration, which is Jack later in life. And I hope that my thoughts, which I kind of remember liking that one, I hope that those are true, and I do like it a bit more than this one, because as a whole, I've found King's collaborations have been kind of some of the lowest tier works of his. This one, his collaborations with Richard Chismar were very forgettable. His collaboration with his son, Owen King, is frankly one of his worst books. So I was a bit disappointed in this one, but I do hope that I get more out of Black House when I pick it up later this quarter. Up next is I listened to the audiobook of Cold Days by Jim Butcher, which is the X installment in the Dresden Files, 14 maybe? Yes, I think it's number 14. And James Marsters does the audiobooks, and he is fantastic. He brings Harry Dresden to life. It's a first-person narrative, so he kind of is Harry Dresden. And I enjoyed the audiobook performance that he gave of this book. So in Cold Days, we see that because of some things that happened 2 books ago in Changes, we see that Harry is now in a very different, let's just say, situation. Because I want to keep this spoiler-free because it's the 14th book of a series. And in this new situation, he has to kind of learn how to adapt to this new role that he finds himself in. So there's a lot of kind of fish out of water elements that I really enjoyed. I mean, I do love seeing Harry struggle with certain elements of that. The other thing that I liked is there's just some interesting kind of politicking because of this. And for me, that was the big joy of this, was seeing Harry have to deal with this. And then when people start to kind of come at him in different ways, trying to understand who he can trust and who he can't trust. Additionally, one of the things I love about this series in general is the secondary characters, first of all. But when he includes the secondary characters in a book, it's always meaningful. And for this, it was doubly meaningful because of what had happened in the 2 previous books. Seeing who Harry reaches out to was very significant. And you start to see which characters in particular are the ones that he really, really trusts and the ones that he really has to and wants to keep his connection to. And I love that aspect of it as well. The series has such a cumulative effect of not only just the world building elements and how the narrative just continues to ramp up. But for me, the cumulative effect of the relationships of Harry and some of these characters around him just continue to have so much more depth and so much more meaning. And for me, those were the best parts of this book. There were a couple scenes where, one scene in particular just really, really got me, where Harry is with one of his friends, and I'll just say, for those that read Dresden, while keeping it spoiler free, we first met him in the third book. A scene with those two characters just had so much heart and just so much connection. And when Harry oftentimes just feels lost, this is the character he goes to, and I just love those two characters, and that continues in the next book. But I really enjoyed this installment of Dresden. I see why everyone says that Everything from Changes and Beyond is at a different level, because it really is. When I first hit, what was it, book 7, was the first time I thought, oh, we got an S-tier Dresden. No, we hadn't had an S-tier Dresden yet. I look back, and that's kind of a lower tier. Maybe I need to do a tier list. I think I'll do a tier ranking list. There we go. Got a video coming out in about a month, because I'm listening to Battleground right now. Anyway, I really enjoyed this, and I'm loving where the series is now. The stakes are higher. The connection to the characters is deeper. The world building continues to impress, and I really enjoyed reading book number 14 of the Dresden Files in September. And I really enjoyed the 15th installment of the Dresden Files. It's my book of the month, and that's Skin Game by Jim Butcher. I listened to this one on audio as well, and this was James Marsters. He's just amazing at this. Anyway, I had seen that Skin Game is often people's favorite in the series, and I totally understand why. I think for me it still changes, but this one's right up there. It'll probably be a finalist for Book of the Year. It's that good of a book. So this book's a heist, and Harry is with a motley crew of individuals, and he's also with some individuals that he'd rather not be with. And I love that aspect of it. I always love kind of the, I don't know, I hate the word frenemies, but it's kind of true. I always like seeing protagonists team up with someone who is bad for maybe different reasons that might be good. And I always love seeing those kind of team ups in fiction. And it works really well here, because Harry has to go into this heist where it's super high stakes, what they're going to steal and who they're going to steal it from. And he's forced into this because of his new position in the fairy court, and the people he has to do this heist with, he can't trust anybody. And it's extremely high stakes. It features perhaps the greatest antagonist in the entire series, which is part of it, so I like that aspect of it. But once again, what I love so much in this series is not the high-octane moments, but the meaningful character moments between the big action, kind of set pieces. And we get several of them here. We get one that has a theme of fatherhood, which will leave people in tears. There's one with themes of brotherhood and friendship, which will leave you in tears. I mean, it's a pretty strong book, and I understand why it's most people's favorites. It's probably my number 2, but it's not much far off from Changes for me. The stakes in this series continues to rise. As I mentioned in the previous review, that the layering of the world building just keeps adding more elements, and it almost seems like, oh, we're built out. No, we keep getting more and more, and I just love this book. Anyway, Dresden has become a favorite series of mine, and it just keeps getting better. You can probably assume that by the end of next month, I will be 100% caught up on this series, with just two more of the novels to go. I do have some of the short fiction to read, but I'm not worried about that. I'll read that when I get to it. But my book of the month was another Dresden Files book. I think it's been a couple months in a row that Dresden's taken the top award for the month. But Skin Game by Jim Butcher is my book of the month, September 2025. Anyway, that was my month. If you've read any of these, I'd love to talk with you in the comments section below. Just please label any spoilers. And I'd love to hear the best thing that you read in September. What was it? Please let me know. If you like this video, please like and subscribe. You can also find me on Twitter, Goodreads, and the Fireside Discord. I'd love to interact with you there. As always, thank you for watching. Until next time, goodbye.